Today is the fourth and final day of our graduate student presentations for the Peanut Innovation Lab. We have several students from both the US and Africa presenting today, representing, I think, the full gamut of our research areas at the lab, from gender and youth on down to value chain development and the other areas of research that we support. So next slide, please, Kristen. I just want to give a few sort of logistics notes for the meeting today. We are recording all of the sessions, which is something that we plan to do in general at the lab. And Kristen will be sending you out a link to that recording after the meeting. As usual, unless you're the speaker, please make sure that your microphone is muted and your video is off. That helps us reduce bandwidth, and then of course also just disruption to the presenters. Because we're doing this virtually, we're going to be doing the questions following presentations, and you can either submit them in the chat window, which you can find on the bottom of your screen. You can see the blue arrow pointing to it there, or orally after each presentation. And for the presenters, you may see then things coming up in the chat box. Just ignore them as best you can, and don't feel that you need to interrupt yourself during the presentation to answer them. You can answer those questions at the very end. I think you're also aware that Kristen has the slides. She has all of the presentations for the students, and she'll be advancing the slides. So when you're ready to go to the next one, you can just say next, and she'll get you there. I think that that's it as far as the logistics, and that we can move on to our first presenter, who is Abdul-Hafiz Alidu. I see that he's ready with his video. Abdul-Hafiz is working with Nick Magnan and Nelson Opoku, along with others at the University of Georgia and UDS in Ghana. And he's going to be presenting some work related to that project, which is on farmer incentives for quality peanuts in Ghana. So thank you, Abdul-Hafiz, over to you.
Thank you to everyone. It's past 12 p.m. here. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Alidu Abdul-Hafiz. I'm presenting on the topic Developing Manual Groundnut Sorting and Grading Standards in Ghana. For MPhil Biotechnology at the University for Development Studies, Tamale, Ghana. My academic supervisor, Dr. Nelson Opoku, also from the University for Development Studies, Tamale, Ghana. My US mentor, Nick Magnan, at the University of Georgia, and other supervisors, Jenny Rose, also at the University of Georgia. Next, please. Next, please. By way of introduction, in Ghana and in many parts of the world, groundnut kernels are consumed directly as raw. Roasted or boiled kernels or oil extracted from the kernels is usually used as culinary or for cooking purposes. This multiple uses of granules makes it an excellent cash crop for domestic markets as well as for foreign trade in several developing and developed countries. The value of the granules product or its products in large companies and in the export market, just like any other agricultural produce, is determined by the quality of the nut or its product. And when we talk about the quality of granules, the major key factors that comes to play is the moisture content of it, the presence of other impurities, and also the aflatoxin level of the nut. Next. Next, please. Therefore, for granules produced by farmers in Ghana and some parts of Africa to reap their full value, these quality factors mentioned must first be at acceptable levels. And so, when one interacts with local farmers in northern region of Ghana, who normally would consume the nuts they produce and preserve part of their produce for income security, or to be sold out to the local markets when prices increase or when they are in need of cash to solve other household problems. For these farmers, actually producing very high quality groundnut devoid of impurities and the other quality factors mentioned is not of so much importance, since these will usually come with extra effort and for them with no monetary gains in the markets that they traditionally trade their nuts for money. Next, please. And so the main project, which is farmer incentive for quality Ghanaian peanut, that I am part of, tries to connect local groundnut farmers to premium buyers who would pay a premium price for high quality nuts that is produced by farmers who put in extra effort to make sure very good granules are produced. And in ensuring quality granules in terms of these granules being free from impurities and also with acceptable aflatoxin levels by these local farmers after these granules are produced. It's usually done by manual sorting or hand sorting. And so manual sorting, in fact, has been found to be very effective and also affordable approach in reducing aflatoxin, particularly among markets women in Ghana and other African countries as well. Because here, electronic sorting machines has not yet been adopted, probably due to the technology involved in this usage or the cost that would be involved. Please, next. Next, please. So, other works, such as that of Galvez 2003, showed that manual sorting could reduce aflatoxin level from as high as 300 ppb to a very low value of about 15 ppb. Also, in Gambia, Zoo et al. Demonstrated the effectiveness of educational sorting, which is the same as manual or physical sorting, in reducing aflatoxin levels among women in selected communities in Gambia. And so, one of the major constraints to manual sorting is actually the unavailability of an established standard to which features of granules that are at high risk of aflatoxin contamination to aid in manual or hand sorting of granules, which will help in reducing aflatoxin levels produced by these local farmers or which are being sold by these granule traders in the local markets. And there's also the unavailability of standard granule grades, which have defined characteristics that in actual sense could command price in the country. Next, please. And so the research objective is to morphologically characterize high-risk aflatoxin granules using size and other morphological characteristics such as shriveliness, how darkened the nuts are, whether or not the nuts still have the shells attached to them broken, and other morphological characteristics. The second objective would be to determine the effect of each of these high-risk groups on aflatoxin levels in good granules by striking these nuts with low number of grains of high-risk nuts. We'll also develop a chart or a guide made on based on these morphological characteristics to aid in sorting and grading granules, both at the farmer level and at the traders level in the various markets. We also isolate and identify fungi species that may be associated with the various aflatoxin risk components in the granules. Next, please. So by our methodology, sample collection and handling. Okay, sample collection and then handling. We'll take good nuts and then as well as bad ones. Bad ones are actually those nuts that are being sorted out by these market women or farmers. And the good nuts are the remaining nuts that are readily available in the market for sale to consumers. And so these groups of granules were collected in Ghana, in almost all the regions in Ghana, by purposefully sampling markets that deal with granule trading, and also randomly sampling 2 or 3 market women that actually sell these granules. These samples were taken and then brought back up to the lab. Okay. Next, please. So this was how the sorting was done. We used manual sorting to put the various bad granule into the various characteristics of bad nuts we can most probably have in these nuts. And as part of the methodology, we train ordinary people to help in the sorting, just to be certain that if this work is successful, the guide could actually be used by the ordinary farmer or trader to sort the nuts into these various bad characteristics. And the good ones that are being taken in the markets would be sorted into different grades using standardized seeds. Next, please. So after the manual sorting, which was done after all the bad nuts that were taken around the country were boiled together, and then similar character bad nuts were put into groups. And so these are the sorted categories that we have. To the left are those that were partially darkened. And what we meant by partially darkened were those that have about 50% of the coats, the granite coat being darkened. And to the right shows the total darkened bad nuts. And for these nuts, they have more than 80% of the whole coat being darkened in a way. Next, please. We also have several classes of shriveled nuts in these sorted granules. And the first of which, from the left, is the small size shriveled granule. In the middle are the medium size, and the far right is the big size shrivel. These are all different classes of shrivel nuts. And we hope to establish the size ranges of all these size granules using very sensitive digital calipers. Next, please. There was also coatless ones, those granules that completely or partially lost their coats were put together and is named coatless granules. And there were others too that were actually full nuts, but they appear whitish. Some of them were actually immature nuts, and others were actually mature but with white coats. So these particular group of granules too were sorted out and were classified as white coat granules. Please, next. And then we also have the similar good nuts, the left hand side. Even in the among the bad granules, you could find some of them still looking very good, just as normal granules. So these good-looking granules too were sorted out as similar good, and the right is the aftersort, and this is the class that were not able to be put in any of the categories identified, and they were usually the foods and other characters that could not fall into any of the identified characteristics. Next, please. So after doing the manual sorting for the bad granules, we intend using the sieves to also grade the good granules. Here we are trying to adopt the US system of grading granules by size using standardized sieves. This is expected to put the various varieties of granules we have here in Ghana in standardized size ranges. The effects of the set grading on aflatoxin level would be experimented. As at the moment, we are still waiting for these seeds to be sent to us so that we can do this grading too. Next, please. And so when all these gradings or sortings are completed, what we'll do next is to test aflatoxin level in the various categories and grades that will be identified. So we'll test on the identified categories of the bad granule, test as the cerebral ones, the darkened ones mentioned earlier. We'll test aflatoxin on all of them to see the aflatoxin level. And then we'll also test on the different size graded knobs. Those that are graded by the seed, we'll test the aflatoxin level to see the effect of the size grading on the aflatoxin level of such knobs. We'll as well spike identified bad granule samples with granules with very low aflatoxin level. That is already determined. Next, please. So the test will be done using the new gene review plus aflatoxin test. Is indicated in the previous. Okay, the next thing we'll do is to identify and isolate fungi species that will be associated with these granules categories that we have identified. And the method that will be employed here will be the blotter paper method as well as media. That is what will be used. The identified species for each grade will be compared with that of other grades to see if there are differences and similarities between them. Next. So, after these are done, the next item we'll be doing is to create the chart. So this chart would be created that will put the various grades into different classes, class 1, class 2, class 3, based on their aflatoxin level. And it will include very specific defined characteristics of each class, including their size ranges, as well as the presence or the percentage composition of the identified risk components that we have mentioned previously. This chart will also include color pictures that will be very simple and precise description of the various grades. The chart, when created, will aid in sorting granules by showing various risk components. Please, next. The main challenge here is actually us waiting for to receive the needed test case and also the equipment that the seed that will help in the size grading to continue with the rest of the work. And the delay is actually as a result of the ongoing COVID-19 restrictions we are experiencing around the world. Next, please. So the results of the research by conclusion would greatly aid local farmers in Ghana particularly and market women to in sorting and quickly identifying high-risk aflatoxin contaminated granule. It also holds the potential of creating standardized granule grades in Ghana based on size and the presence of the risk components to complement our usual varietal system of classifying granule. I hope that if this chart is created, it will be accepted as a national standard for sorting and grading granules in Ghana, since there is none like that in the country as at the moment. Next, please. These are the two references. Next, please. Okay. I think this code was taken in 2019 from the Tokedo and 2018 from the Tokedo in 2018 and then 2019 from Dr. Oten from Sari. I'd like if someone ever tells you that you are putting too much peanut butter on your bread, stop talking to them. You don't need that kind of thing. So this, I say thank you to everyone for listening. Questions, comments.
Great, thank you so much, Abdul-Hafiz. It was an excellent presentation and ending on also a very positive note. Thank you. We have a couple of questions for you in the chat box, which you might be able to see, but I'll also read them out loud. Isaac, who's on our external advisory panel, mentioned that it's a very practical study that can really be of use to processors and consumers as well as farmers, which I certainly agree with. It's nice to see that. He had a question about finding out the shortcoming of nuts depending only on morphological characteristics in the estimation of the extent of aflatoxin. In other words, to what extent are the good-looking groundnuts still holding some aflatoxin? I know that you did discuss that a bit in your presentation, but if you'd like to respond further. And Cynthia also has a question.
Can you come again with your question? I've not gotten it clearly.
Do you see in the chat? It might be easier because of the sound.
Okay.
So one of the questions I think is if you only look at the morphological characteristics, at what the seeds really look like, is it possible that there are some good-looking nuts that still have aflatoxin in them?
Yes. Actually, this is actually an improvement in a previous study I did during the graduate studies, and we had similar nuts too in the graded sample. And actually, the good ones actually have very high aflatoxin levels, just like the other characters. So we expect that even in this study too, those good-looking nuts will still hold high aflatoxin levels.
Dave had a question about, are you sorting the raw nuts or did you do any roasting or blanching?
No, I didn't do any blanching. This is how they were taken from the market. We have actually put them into those various characters.
And he also was wondering how many categories do you think is reasonable to expect a person to sort into?
At the moment, we have 9 categories, which, from the previous study, all should have high aflatoxin levels. And so I think the minimum for now will be all the 9, since it's all should very high aflatoxin levels.
Okay, and then our last question from Cynthia, who's also on the external advisory panel. She is wondering if this grading system is implemented and adopted, do you think that markets will respond with those price incentives based on quality? And related, are there already prices for quality in markets in Ghana?
Yes, it will aid in that, since it is implemented. What it means is that we will have different grades of granules, and so the very high grades will command higher prices than the low grade granules. And if this is also established, it will also encourage farmers to produce very high quality granules to get more value for their business.
Great, well, thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation. I think we'll probably leave it there just for the interest of time, but as I said, these presentations will be recorded, and we encourage both other graduate students and other scientists and members of the Peanut Lab to follow up with any of our students about their presentations later. So our next presenter is Daisy Kemigisha from Uganda. She's working with Dr. Carrie Stevens, Okello, and others at Makerere University and the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And she'll be presenting some of her work, I think the beginnings of her work on a project related to youth empowerment and engagement in the peanut sector in Uganda using an innovative methodology called Photovoice. So over to you, Daisy. I will also note that there's sometimes a delay in between Kristen and whoever is presenting. And so if you say next and you don't see your slide advance, just wait a few seconds. Okay, thanks, Daisy.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning to you all. This is Daisy Kemigisha. I'm a student at Makerere University, Uganda, pursuing a master's degree in agriculture and applied economics. Under the project that's looking to empower the youth in Uganda using Photovoice. And my topic is to investigate the barriers and the drivers of youth participation in groundnut value chains in the districts of Tororo and Nwoya in Uganda. And those are my academic supervisors, Professor Carrie Stevens, the US mentor, Dr. Stephen Lwasa, and Professor John Kemigisha. Next slide, please. So just a brief background on the study. The groundnut is the second most important legume after the common bean in Uganda. And it's also a very important cash crop in Uganda, as well as food. It's known for its ability to fix nitrogen into soil to improve fertility for other crops. And it's also used to extract oil. So some of the documented drivers and barriers for men and women along value chains, groundnut value chains, are access to inputs and resources such as capital and land. We have access to education, access to extension services and agriculture information. And lastly, mobility, which is mostly affecting the women. Next slide, please. So we have personal variables as well as household variables and community variables that are affecting youth engagement in agriculture. And some of those, as you can see, we have age, education level, marital status, resource ownership, access to extension services, gender influence, among others. Yeah. Next slide, please. So the problem, the gap that this study is looking to fill is that, first of all, Uganda is a youthful economy with 75% of its population being under the age of 30. And, being under the age of 30. And the future of Uganda is actually dependent on agriculture, and yet most youth have not taken up the opportunities to participate in agriculture, and in particular the agricultural value chains. And the groundnut is very important in the north and east of Uganda. And yet research to capture the youth views, their drivers, their barriers, the things that are disturbing them, that are affecting their participation in groundnut value chains has remained insufficient. But then we know that employment provision through groundnut value chain opportunities could potentially resolve this youth bulge, this problem that that Uganda is facing that is critical to its development. Next slide, please. So this study is generally going to look towards contributing to increased youth participation in groundnut value chains using Photovoice. And specifically, these are three things that the study is aiming towards: to characterize the groundnut value chain, youth participants and non-participants, to assess the determinants of youth participation in groundnut value chains, and lastly, to assess youth willingness to invest more so as to shift to the more profitable nodes of the value chain. Next slide, please. The study is going to test this hypothesis. The first is that the youth who participate in groundnut value chains, okay, and generally in agriculture, are better off compared to their non-participant counterparts. The second would be education, awareness, and support from NGOs determines their participation in groundnut value chains. And lastly, empowering youth with knowledge increases their willingness to participate in the more profitable nodes of the groundnut value chain. Yeah, next slide, please. So these are the ways we're going to collect the data. So for the quantitative data, which is more applicable to objectives 1 and 2, we shall carry out the baseline and end-line surveys. Here we shall develop an ODK program questionnaire to collect data for those two objectives. And for the sample size that we shall use for the baseline, from Cochrane's sample size formula, we see that we get 385 for Toro and 379 for Noya, but due to budgetary and time constraints, as well as the prevailing pandemic, we cannot reach as many people as we'd want to, so we'll do almost half of each, so it makes it 150 per district. For the qualitative data, which is for the third objective, we shall use the process Photovoice. This is a tool that has been used by various researchers. It's mostly used by the marginalized groups, looking at the women, the youth. It has mostly been used in health, whereby these groups are empowered to speak and identify the strengths and weaknesses, their concerns, through taking pictures and captioning them. And this is mostly to influence policy makers to bring about change about things that they do not like, or just generally to bring out things that are that they like about their community, not only the weaknesses. Yeah. So next slide, please. These are the steps that we are going to use, that are going to be used in, they're going to be followed in the Photovoice process. 15 youth participants will be recruited per district in two age brackets, 20 to 24 and 25 to 29. And after that, we shall do the training of the Photovoice participants. After they have accepted to participate, we shall train them on how to use the smartphones, how to operate cameras, how to approach people when they want to seek consent to take their pictures. And yeah, basically. Then the second step will be photography and assignment and collection. Here we shall give them the cameras, the smartphones, and give them the liberty to take as many pictures as possible as they can. And also we shall give them notebooks as well to capture views that cannot be gotten on camera, in most cases when consent has been denied for them to take pictures. And on a monthly basis, these pictures will be handed in so that the researchers can keep tracking the progress of these participants and ensuring that they're in line, that they keep in line with the objectives that was explained at the start. So along this line, the participants will be guided to assess the profits at each node. For example, if a youth takes a picture of 2 bags of groundnuts, we shall guide them on how to assess the profits by asking the costs incurred and then the expected selling price so that they can assess the profits. And from this, we shall be able to know the most profitable nodes according to the youth. Then we'll move on to discussing the photos, where we shall have two focus groups, one for the youth groups, the selected youth groups, and another for the adults, where they'll be able to discuss and share opinions and explain the photos that best explain their views and why they chose them. And we shall follow this guide. They'll follow these guidelines as we explain each photo, what they see in the photo, what's really happening there, how does it relate to their lives, why does this problem or strength exist according to them, and who could this photo educate, who could it be helpful to, and what can they actually do about it, or what can we do about it. Then we'll move on to photo selection, where there'll be, after discussing, after getting the adult input in the focus discussion group, they'll be able to select the best photos and then present them at the community sharing festival. On this day, they'll also be able to, visit the field so that they can look at the things that they have, the groundnuts that they have grown as in the 2 seasons of planting. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yes, so this is how we're going to analyze the data. For objective 1, characterizing the youth participants and non-participants in the groundnut value chain, we shall use Starter 15 to generate descriptive statistics that will include the measures of dispersion like variance, standard deviation, the ranges, and then measures of central tendency like means and frequencies. And then we shall also employ the cross tabulations to compare the youth participants against the non-participants by variables such as age, sex, as we looked at in a previous slide, the variables that affect their participation. And then these results will then be presented in tables and interpreted in Word, Microsoft Word. For objective 2, we shall employ the binary probit model. This is a model that's used for a yes or no case. So we have that function where the y is the variable, the dummy variable, which is the dependent variable. In this case, we're looking at youth participation in groundnut value chain. So it takes on the value of y if the youth participates in the groundnut value chain, and takes on the value of 0 if the youth does not. And x will be representing the variables that are affecting the value of y. Those are the variables such as age, sex, household size, farm size, access to education, etc. And then beta is the vector of parameters. That's by how much y changes when there's a change in x. Then for objective 3, that's for the photo voice. The discussions are initially audio recorded in the local languages, and then they'll be transcribed and then translated into English and then imported to Atlas T. But then in this case, we shall use version 8. I'm sorry I put 6, but there's a version 8. And then we shall analyze it using conventional content analysis, whereby the researchers will read the transcripts as many times as possible and group the related codes into categories and later match them into themes. And then we shall present this with quotes and photographs. Next slide, please. So for the work plan, the initial briefing, the preliminary briefing of youth participants on the project and Photovoice process actually happened last year for a week. It took a week in both districts. And then I'm still working on the writing and defending of the proposal. By the end of September, I'll have defended. Data collection is projected to take 7 months. And then data handling and analysis will take 1 month. Thesis writing 4 months, and publication writing a month. Next slide, please. So the challenges that I have faced, that the study has faced, the COVID-19 pandemic led to the closure of the university and also restricted travel to the districts, the sites, and also for the US team to enter Uganda. But then also due to the COVID situation, we've had issues with delays in funding, and then things have been defending of the proposal, which was supposed to take place in May and in person, is now going to be done probably via Zoom or in person, but with very few people. And then the training that was initially, we're going to do a training of 2 weeks in March, but it has been moved because of this COVID. And then the funding method of the funders, which requires you to first borrow or use your money and then get reimbursed, has also been a challenge. And then there's also inadequate literature on youth in groundnut value chains. Something I did not talk about was some of the accomplishments we've been able to make. We visited the sites already, the sites in Nora and Toya, and we talked to the youth and their coordinators about the project and Photovoice. And then we also got a training on gender in youth through the Great Peanut Innovation Lab course that took place earlier this year in March. And then we were also able to visit Serere Research Station in July. And Dr. Okello took us through the various types of groundnuts and the diseases, and generally we came back knowing more about groundnuts. And then we've been able to link up with people who are very well conversant with Photovoice, like Dr. Mwonge. Yeah, those are some of the accomplishments. Next slide, please. So these are just some pictures. This is when we had gone to Bugolobi for the Great Peanut Innovation Lab course, and then the field visit with Dr. Okello in Serere. Yeah, thank you so much for listening, and I'm welcoming any questions and comments. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Daisy. That was excellent. There are a couple of questions and comments in the chat box, which you can take a look at. Isaac had two comments kind of on the way that you think about operationalized youth. So both, as he points out, the fact that, which I think you did indeed in the beginning, that they're not a homogeneous entity, that there are going to be age differences, gender differences, and other sort of contextual differences that influence the way that youth are participating in the groundnut sector. And also he pointed out that it's also important to think about them within the family ecosystem. So that, and I think David Okello down there describes these differences between the way that youth typically live. So are they living, in fact, with their parents in multi-generational households? Are they living on their own as the heads of their own households? That will influence their ability to participate in the peanut value chain, and probably their interest in doing that as well. Mm-hmm. Dave had some questions about how you determined the two districts and what sort of important differences there are between them. So maybe you could talk a bit about that, and then we can get to the other remaining questions.
Okay, so for David, how we're determining whether a youth participates in the groundnut value chain, we'll find out from the baseline survey. A question, do you participate in the value chain or not? So yes, or the answer is yes or no. And then the two districts, how did we determine them? Tora and Moya, they have good climate for growing groundnuts and are very well known. And because groundnuts is mostly grown in the north and east of Uganda, so so we had to choose two districts from each. And also because Dr. Okello is already having some of his Peanut Innovation Lab activities running there. So he already has farmer groups in those two districts. that's how we came to that conclusion.
So Daisy, maybe just before we move on to the next presenter, we can look at Helga's question. She was curious about how the youth that you've interacted with so far, both male and female, have reacted to the project when you went to visit them.
Yeah, they're very enthusiastic because they're already growing grown-ups actually. So they're looking forward to it. And so since they're also getting smartphones, they're excited about it. We haven't yet gotten the chance to actually train them about the Photovoice. We just talked to them about the project, and obviously they were interested, and their coordinator was very helpful in trying to make them willing. A big number of them showed up for the initial briefing. Yeah.
Great, well, thank you, Daisy. I do want to also direct you to the comments. Dr. Castellanos, Dr. Paige Castellanos is at Penn State University. She's one of the PIs on another project that we're doing in Ghana. And she has experience, as she mentioned there, using Photovoice with a master's student in Honduras recently. And so, so this is sort of something that we hope will come out of these meetings, is that we get some cross-pollination between our different projects. And so you should feel free to get in touch with each other, and I can help facilitate that as well. I would also recommend with these methodologies, especially if it's a new one to you, that it's a good idea to practice doing it yourself. And so that's something that you and Martha and the others might think about doing. Just practice, pretend that you're a research subject doing this, take photos for a week, interview each other, and then sort of, you know, figure out what the pitfalls, I think, potentially are of the methodology, or how it sort of feels as a research participant to be engaged in it. So thank you very much. I think we should move on to our third presenter, is Jennifer Abogoom, and she's going to be discussing production packages for Ghana. So if you're ready, Jennifer, we'll get your presentation up.
Hello, everyone. Please, can you hear me?
Yes, you're good, Jennifer. I can hear you.
Okay. My name is Jennifer Abogoom, and I'm a student pursuing MPhil Seed Science and Technology at the Kwame University of Science and Technology. And I'll be presenting on the research topic, evaluation of perceptions, preferences, and quality of peanut seeds in Ghana. This research is being supervised by Professor Richard Akoma and Dr. Robert Alidu, all of KNUST. Next, please. A little background on the study. Owing to the many benefits that accrued from the cultivation of peanuts in Ghana, peanuts is the major leguminous crop that is cultivated in the country, whereby about 74% of households in the northern savannah of Ghana are into the cultivation of peanuts. Next, please. However, the estimates from the Ministry of Food and Agriculture shows that there's a fluctuating trend in the yields of peanuts obtained in the country, whereby the yields obtained are usually below the estimated potential yield of 3.5 metric tons per hectare. And though many factors may account for this low productivity of peanuts in the country, limited access to and the use of high quality seeds poses as a major constraint to the high productivity of peanuts in the country. This is because certified seeds are less widely used in peanuts cultivation compared to other crops such as maize, rice, and cowpea. Next, please. This therefore means that most farmers use seeds from their own stock or purchase seeds from the local open markets. The problem here is that quality of seeds obtained from these sources are questionable due to many factors such as poor storage conditions and poor seed management. Also, no empirical study currently exists in the country assessing farmers' perception about the various sources of seed and their preferences required regarding the quality of seeds in the country. Next, please. hence the need for this research. This research will bring to light the quality levels of peanut seeds that farmers in the country use for production. It will also provide critical information for seed producers and traders in their supply of seeds with focus on quality attributes. Next, please. The research therefore sought to determine viability of seed lots that were obtained from farmers, the local seed open markets, and research institutes, to evaluate varietal variations that may exist among these seed lots from these three seed sources, to describe the seed lot characteristics of samples from these three seed sources, as well as to assess farmers' perceptions about seed quality in relation to seed sources and their preferences for seed quality in relation to seed sources. Next, please. The research was therefore into two parts. That is the seed quality aspect, which took the form of an experimental research and a survey. 100 seed samples were collected from 5 major producing peanut regions in the country, as well as 2 main crop research institutes in the country. These samples were made up of 46 farmer-saved seed samples, 45 local seed samples obtained from the local open markets, and 9 samples obtained from the research institutes. Next, please. The seed samples were assessed for their moisture content, their physical purity, next please, their germination ability, that's their viability, and then their seed health status following the Easter rules for seed testing. Next, please. A field experiment was also carried out to assess the field emergence of these seed samples, genetic purity of these seed samples, as well as their genetic variations that may occur between the seed samples that were taken. Next, please. Data were taken on moisture content, germination percentages, the mean germination time, weight of pure seeds, other seeds and inert matter, infection frequency, seedling emergence percentage, as well as various plant qualitative and quantitative traits. Next, please. Relevant analyses were performed on the data collected, such as ANOVA and cluster analysis. ANOVA was performed on the moisture content, the percentage germination, percentage infection, as well as the field emergence percentage, using the GenStat and R statistical packages. Next, please. To assess farmers' perception and preferences, a survey research was adopted where a structured questionnaire was administered to the selected farmers. The study was carried out in the 5 regions where the seed samples were initially collected, and a multi-stage sampling technique was used in selecting the farmers for the enumeration. Next, please. In total, 10 districts from these 5 regions were purposely selected based on their production volume, whereby subsequently 2 committees from each district were randomly selected, and then afterwards 10 farmers from each committee randomly selected to respond to the study questionnaire. This therefore gave us a total sample size of 200 peanut farmers for the survey. Next, please. The questionnaire contained various statements on farmers' demographic and socio-economic characteristics, their production and seed management practices, their seed sources, the quality of peanuts, their perception about the quality of peanuts from the various seed sources, their preferences for various seed quality attributes, and their preferences for varietal traits of peanuts. After the survey, descriptive statistical analysis was performed on the data, and a mean perception score was calculated to assess farmers' perceptions. This was performed using the SPSS statistical package, as well as Microsoft Excel. Next, please. Results. The results obtained indicates that the average moisture content of seeds obtained from all three sources were significantly different. The same result, likewise, the genetic purity of the seeds from these three sources were also significantly different. However, seeds from the research institutes recorded the lowest moisture content of 5.42%, and the seeds from the research also recorded the highest genetic purity of 100%, whereas the farmer saved seeds recorded the seeds from the markets recorded the highest moisture content of 6.5, and then the lowest genetic purity of 96.7. Also, seeds from the research institute recorded the highest percentage of pure seeds, 98%, and then the market recorded the lowest percentage of pure seeds, 96.6. Next, please. Regarding the health status of the seed samples, in total, 9 fungal species were identified, and the seeds obtained from the local open market recorded the highest total fungal contamination of 94%. And Aspergillus niger was the predominant occurring fungi, followed by Aspergillus flavus, whereas Aspergillus versicolor was the least occurring fungi identified in the seed samples obtained. Next, please. Germination, the germination test that was carried out, the results indicate that there were no significant differences in the mean germination percentages between the farmer saved seed lots and the market seed lots. However, both seed lots were significantly different from the research institutes. Similar results were obtained on the field, where the farmer saved seed lots were not significantly different from the research seed lots, but both were significantly different from seed lots obtained from the markets. Next, please. Cluster analysis of 95 seed samples that were using the assertions into 3 main clusters, indicating a relative amount of variation that existed among the seed samples. Next, please. Principal component analysis also revealed that the first 5 principal components accounted for about 52% of the variations that were observed, whereby the first and second principal components contributed to about 18.4 and 11.6% respectively to the total variations that were observed among the seed samples. Next, please. The survey results. The results from the survey indicates that a typical peanut farmer in Ghana is a male who is within the age brackets of 35 to 44 years with no formal education. Next, please. The results also indicate that majority of the peanut farmers in Ghana have over 5 years experience in peanut cultivation, and this is mostly done on lands that are less than 2 acres. Chinese was the predominant variety that was cultivated by the peanut farmers, followed by Manipinta. This means that there's low adoption of improved peanut varieties in the country. Since Samno 22 and Yenya also are all improved varieties but recorded low percentages. Next, please. Peanuts in cultivation from this survey reveals that peanut cultivation in Ghana is done purposely for commercial purposes, and the farmers usually rely on their own saved seeds as their main source of seeds for production, whereas the local open markets were their alternative source of seeds for peanut cultivation. Next, please. Farmers were asked to rank their top 3 reasons for their choice of seed supply, and quality was ranked number 1, followed by availability, and affordability being the 3rd top reason for their choice of seed supply. Also, farmers were asked to rank their top 3 quality attributes that they look out for in selecting peanut seeds for cultivation, where germination was ranked number 1, freedom from pests and diseases was ranked number 2, and freedom from extraneous materials or impurities were ranked number 3. Next, please. As a way of maintaining the quality of peanut seeds by farmers, majority of the farmers clean out impurities from these seeds. However, interestingly, these farmers, majority of them do not perform any test on their peanut seeds before cultivation, and the reason being that they lack knowledge on seed testing methods. Next, please. The study also revealed that majority of these farmers stored their peanut seeds in the unshelled form, usually in jute bags, with no use of any form of chemical during storage. Next, please. Farmers were given about 8 statements regarding their perception about seed quality, and they generally agreed to 7 of these statements, but strongly agreed to the statement that use of high quality seeds will help increase peanut yields in the country. Next, please. Out of 10 statements that were presented to farmers regarding their perception about peanut seed quality from these 3 sources, the farmers generally agreed to 6 of these statements, but however undecided about 4 of these statements. And interestingly, these statements were regarding peanut seed quality obtained from the local open markets. Next, please. The results of this survey also indicates that high germination rate was the most preferred peanut seed quality by farmers, followed by freedom from pests and diseases, whereas uniformity in size was the least preferred seed quality attribute of peanut farmers. Next, please. Early maturity or early maturing varieties was the most preferred peanut varieties, followed by adaptability to local environmental conditions, whereas the high home yields varieties and high oil content varieties were least preferred by these farmers. Next, please. In conclusion, the result from this research indicates that farmers saved seeds, and seeds from the Research Institute possessed high quality attributes of moisture content and physical purity. Likewise, seeds from the local open markets possessed high quality attributes of moisture content and genetic purity. However, farmer saved seeds and local open seeds were low in genetic purity and physical purity levels respectively. Next, please. Interestingly, seeds from all 3 sources were of low viability and poor health, and the seed samples were identified to be genetically diverse based on their morphological traits. Peanut farmers generally agree that use of high quality seeds helps to improve yields. This means that they are generally aware of the importance of using high quality seeds in peanut production. Also, farmers agree that both certified and farmer saved seeds are of high quality. Next, please. Farmers were, however, generally undecided about the quality of seeds obtained from the local open markets. High germination rate and freedom from pests and diseases are the most preferred seed quality attributes of farmers, as indicated from the survey. Early maturity and adaptability to local environmental conditions are also the most preferred varietal traits, as indicated by farmers through the survey. Next, please. Plans are, however, underway to assess the genetic purity of farmer-saved seed samples using molecular methods, whereby 21 farmer-saved seeds, which are purported to be the Chinese varieties, will be screened against a Chinese variety that will be obtained from crop sari, and then 8 farmer-saved seeds, which are purported to be Yenya variety will also be screened against a Yenya variety that will be obtained from the Crops Research Institute. And this will be done using about 25 pairs of SSR mark primers. Next, please. I wish to thank the USA through the BEHEAD program for sponsoring this project and to all my advisors. Next, please. Thank you very much for your attention.
Great, thank you so much, Jennifer. Very well done. There are a few questions for you in the chat box to the right. We probably won't have time to answer all of these now, or for you to answer all of them now, but these will be available after the talk. Dave had a question about the range of germination, the percentage rate of germination for each of the three sources. Were they around the average, or were there some that were high and some low? And were there any differences between the 5 regions that you worked in?
Well, there were some highs and lows in the germination percentages, because it was realized that about 6 farmer seed samples did not germinate at all, both at the plant house and on the field, which means that those 5 seed samples were dead per se. So that, I think, affected the values, the average germination percentage that was recorded in the farmer seed samples. And about 4 of these seed samples were obtained from one region, which was the Upper East region. And so I think there were some differences in them, little differences in the germination ability from these regions.
And then Helga, I'm gonna try to interpret your question, but feel free to jump in if I'm not getting it correct. Helga has a question about when you discuss seed suppliers or markets, are you talking about kind of a formally organized market, or is this more informal trading between individuals? And then also a question about, is there a movement within the marketing system to offer quality peanut seeds? Is that something that traders or seed sellers, seed suppliers tend to differentiate themselves by?
As I mentioned earlier, there's less use of certified seeds of peanuts in the country, which means that the markets that I'm referring to are local open markets, and they are the same places where the people go for to get granules as a grain. So literally, these seeds are obtained as grains and not seeds per se, because there's no distinction between grain and seeds in these markets. And there's kind of a movement among the markets, from the various regions, which means that seeds can be taken from a particular region and then moved to a different region. And so there's kind of exchanges in the market. It's not formal in Ghana here.
And to follow up on that, David Okolo was wondering if you were able to ascertain the class of the seeds in the market.
No.
And he also had a point about the length of home saving of the farmer saved seeds. And yeah, I'll direct you to the chat box. You can take a look at those comments and maybe follow up on them. He also points out that it may be useful to say that farmers are exhibiting low adoption of improved seeds instead of no adoption at all.
Okay, yes.
And Cynthia also pointed out that in your discussion and description of the demographic statistics or the descriptive statistics, it may be useful to stratify them for men and women.
Okay, I'll consider that.
Okay, good. All right, thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thank you, too.
I think we'll move on to our fourth presenter this morning, who is Kaitlin Fischer. We are staying in Ghana. Kaitlin is a PhD student in rural sociology at Penn State, working on a project on time poverty amongst Ghanaian women. So over to you, Kaitlin.
Thank you. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Kaitlin Fischer, and I'm a PhD student in Rural Sociology and International Agriculture and Development at Penn State University. And there I'm part of a collaborative project led by my advisor, Dr. Leland Glenna, between Penn State and the Savannah Agricultural Research Institute. And today I'm going to be talking about our project, Gendered Time Poverty and Empowerment Among Peanut Producers in Northern Ghana. Next, please. So when I say time poverty, what I mean is that someone who's time poor lacks sufficient time to take on new tasks and responsibilities. Here I have listed the 4 goals for the duration of our project, but today I'm focusing on the first project goal, which is measuring women's and men's time use to better understand time poverty in relation to peanut production. And this is important because Ghanaian women are more time poor than men due to their additional responsibilities in domestic and care work. And also because for our project, we need a baseline understanding of women's and men's time use in order to be able to measure how our technological and training interventions affect women's and men's time use, and thereby their ability to participate in the peanut value chain. Next, please. So in order to accomplish our first project goal, we're administering 2 surveys at multiple times of the year. The extended survey asks questions about household characteristics, crop production, and food security, among a number of other things. And the AWEA survey asks questions meant to measure women's empowerment based on production, resources, income, leadership, and time. We administered the surveys in 2 communities in the Talone district by phone due to COVID-19. Even though we're asking men and women the same questions, we did have in-person assistance from Ghana's Department of Agriculture to ensure that spouses were separate when responding to the surveys and thus able to respond more accurately. And I also wanted to mention here that importantly, we're addressing a common sampling frame issue in time use surveys by talking not only to husbands, but also to their first, second, and third wives if they're in a polygamous household, and their only wife if in a monogamous household. Next, please. So here you can see some basic demographics for the households in our survey research. When we asked men and women how much land is put by their household into peanut cultivation, men said just over 3 acres, whereas women said closer to 2 acres. You can also see here the breakdown of women in our sample by monogamous and polygamous households. Because our sample size is 101 wives, these percentages correspond pretty closely to the actual numbers of women in each of these categories. And as you can see, the majority of women, just over 65%, are either the only wife in a monogamous relationship or the first wife in a polygamous relationship. Next slide, please. So now on to some of our most interesting findings to date from our first of 6 rounds of surveys. And this is actually the first of 6 tables with this layout with respondents listed across the top and their responses listed in the left-hand column. When we asked men and women who mainly owns the peanuts, both men and women said that more often than not, it's the men who mainly owns the peanuts. But when you break down their responses by gender, we see some pretty big differences because men said that 80% of the time, they're the ones who mainly own and manage the peanuts, and 0% of the time, this is the women's job. Whereas when we asked women, they said that 25% of the time, they mainly own and manage the peanuts, and closer to 50% of the time, this is the man's job. Next slide, please. So when it comes to who makes the decision on the amount of peanuts to grow, we see the similar patterns. I think it's striking that no men said that the woman or women in their household decide the amount of peanuts grown. In this case, for this question though, nearly 18% of both men and women said that who makes this decision depends on who manages the field. Next slide, please. When it comes to who makes the decision on the use of sale proceeds, again, we have similar findings. And in fact, out of the 10 variables on which we collected data about ownership and management of peanuts, 9 were statistically significant across gender. Next slide, please. So now for the next few slides, I'm shifting to a slightly different question, which is who in the household is most responsible for particular peanut activities? And for these slides, I'd like you to pay attention to the averages I have highlighted on the right-hand side regarding women's versus men's responsibilities, because this does change according to the activity we're talking about. But when it comes to weeding, men attribute very little responsibility to women or to women and children compared to what women say their responsibility is. Men attribute much more responsibility to themselves and to men with boys. Next slide, please. When it comes to shelling, women, men, and children appear to share this task more equally, which you can see by the averages as well as the last row that I've highlighted. However, as you can see in the first 3 rows, there are still big differences in who women versus men say is primarily responsible for this task. Next slide, please. So lastly, when it comes to selling peanuts in the market, here women clearly play a more predominant role. Both men and women say that selling peanuts at market is more often women's responsibility, but men still attribute more responsibility to themselves than do women. Next slide, please. So our research team thinks that what all of this really means is that when you survey only part of the household, you get only part of the picture. And really this extends beyond just the need to survey both men and women, because we're also learning from our initial findings that it's important to disaggregate data for the women within polygamous households. We found that many men do not recognize women's contributions, but we don't yet know why. So this is something we're hoping to learn more about through our future qualitative research. And if anyone listening has any ideas about why this might be or any suggestions on how we might find this out, this is something I'd love to talk about in the comment period following the presentation. If our findings are reflective of a disconnect between perception and reality, then changing perceptions could go a long way to empowering women, given that high workloads and lack of input in productive decisions are 2 of the biggest contributors to disempowerment in Ghana. And finally, inattention to gender in any peanut project will limit its success by missing the true reality of what's happening on the ground and how best to improve the peanut value chain. If a project is introducing a new technology and providing training, it of course needs to be provided to all the household members who are doing related labor. But talking to just one household member doesn't necessarily give a clear picture of who is doing what, and thus how introducing a new technology could change time allocation and labor. For example, if we're introducing peanut shellers to farmers, then we need to take into account that men and women have different perceptions of who is actually doing most of the shelling. Next slide, please. So in regard to my own challenges, one has been learning new methods of data collection and analysis. And this is really because my background has been in doing qualitative research on the American food system without a gender focus. So really, I'm very much still in the process of learning about this topic and learning about using new methods like surveys. And then kind of a fun challenge I have is figuring out the specifics of my dissertation research and how my dissertation might build upon this current project and expand data collection in a slightly different way. Next slide, please. So thank you all so much for listening. I definitely want to thank the Peanut Innovation Lab and also Drs. Leland Glenna and Edward Marty, who both answer my questions on an almost daily basis, and also to our whole research team who's been really supportive and welcoming to me joining the project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kaitlin, and definitely a big welcome to you, to the Peanut Lab. We're really happy to have you. And that was, yeah, a very fascinating presentation. I think that we really do appreciate the need to open up a window on the black box of the household. And I think Sophia, who's presenting next, will also be sort of building on that theme. Helga has a question there in the chat box, or at least a comment around the difference in perceptions between men and women, or difference in perception about men and women's work. Yeah, as she points out, UCSB's research may have some helpful information there. I don't know if anyone here in the meeting, perhaps from Ghana or who has experience with this, could speak to Caitlin's question about why there is this sort of persistent difference or persistent underestimation of women's participation in peanut agriculture by men in Ghana. But feel free to unmute yourself if you do have something to add to that. In the meantime, I have a question about, I don't think that you were in Ghana probably for the survey due to COVID, but could you talk a little bit about how the logistics of doing the surveys by phone? It sounds like you did have somebody in the village, but the majority of the survey was done on the phone. I think that might be informative for other researchers that may have to pivot to phone-based surveys.
Yeah, so I believe that like an extension person from Ghana's Department of Agriculture was present at the household when the surveys were conducted by phone. And I don't believe they were asking any of the questions. I think they were really just making sure that the men and women were separate. And then we had 10 different enumerators who were asking the questions by phone. And I think they were really successful in that, as far as I know, there was just one wife who wasn't present and wasn't able to participate, but I think we had a really high response rate. And then I'm not sure if this was clear, but we bought phones for each of the households so that they would be able to respond and answer the survey by phone. Did that answer your question?
It did, yes, thank you very much. Yeah, and Leland said over there in the chat that it seems to have worked well. So that's helpful, and I think we've discussed this in the past, but if we do need to do that in other projects, then I think we'll probably be leaning on you for some of those lessons.
Yeah, yeah. I was just going to add, we're currently in the process of doing the second wave of surveys, so we'll have some more information from this round as well.
I just had one question, which is really just more for my own personal curiosity. You know, a lot of agricultural statistics rely on, particularly for yield, rely on farmer estimations of land size. And I've always been curious if there is any consistent difference between men and women in their estimation. And I know that you did see an average difference between men and women. Did that seem to be consistent?
What do you mean, did it seem to be consistent?
Women, so your averages, women were saying, I think it was like 2.6 acres dedicated to peanut, and men, the average was something like 3.2.
Oh.
Was that consistent, or were women, was it a big range between women, or were they consistently saying that they were farming less land?
I believe it was pretty consistent. But again, we've actually had some discussions that we don't really, like, this is another thing, we don't really know why exactly that is. If, you know, one gender over the other, men versus women, either one just doesn't know the actual acreage under production, or if maybe they want to, for some reason, over or underestimate, or maybe even they don't have a good sense of what an acre actually is. So I think it was consistent, but again, we don't really know why.
Hopefully, yeah, some qualitative field work will help with that.
Okay, we are going to move on to Sophia. I think we lost Jessica for a moment. So give me 1 second and we'll get your presentation pulled up, Sophia.
Great, thanks, Kaitlin.
Okay, Sophia, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you much, Kaitlin, for your presentation. Sophia is a PhD student at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and I will turn it over. Thanks, Sophia.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, or good morning from California. I am a PhD student, as was mentioned. I work with Stuart Sweeney and Kathy Bayless, and our project is Gender, Fertility, and Intra-Household Dynamics and Resilience in the Senegalese Peanut Chain. And today I'm going to be presenting on the results of or preliminary results, I should say, of our WHAM pilot study. So we can go ahead and advance that. Thank you. So just to give everyone a little bit of project context, we are firmly in the gender and youth sort of segment here. We're primarily interested in women's experience. And within that, we're interested in their time use for actually many of the reasons that Kaitlin just talked about. In particular, we're very interested in seasonality and climate shocks and births and infant care and the effects that has on time use. And sort of more specifically, we know that there are uneven definitions of work across genders. So domestic work, childcare, peanut production largely fall on women and girls in households. And so they may experience sort of what's been called time poverty because of these additional responsibilities, which we think may impact peanut production. So we're hoping to explore time use among this population using a new method really to get at these sort of downstream effects of seasonality and climate shocks and births and infant care. Next, please. But why do we care about that, right? So our theory of change here kind of rests on this hypothesis that there is a dependence between women's time poverty and household peanut production. So time poverty, as Kaitlin mentioned, is sort of a lack of a kind of appropriate rest or recovery time after completing necessary work during a day. And I would just add to that in severe cases, if an individual were to reduce working time, it would then reduce the stability of a household. So we hypothesize that households experiencing time poverty, and particularly women and girls experiencing time poverty, have less time for innovation and or adoption of best practices, which has downstream effects for peanut production, including sort of decreased peanut production, as well as a decrease in quality. And this sort of decreased peanut production and lower quality then feeds back into time poverty because it limits the sort of nutritional inputs and financial inputs into a household. Next, please. Right. So, and in particular, we really want to understand how fertility and climate shifts exacerbate this cycle. So births and infant care, seasonality and climate shocks, we're unsure sort of how this kind of plays into this negative feedback loop, but we think it's very important. Next, please. And the end goal of that is actually to identify domestic and agrarian time use patterns that constrain peanut production and identify potential interventions to target these challenges. So the idea being, if we can understand the causes of time poverty and the sort of time use patterns and constraints of time poverty, then we can change this, the sort of directional arrows here and say we have more time for innovation and adoption of best practices, which would then increase peanut production and quality, which would then increase sort of nutritional and financial inputs into a household, which would further sort of potentially decrease time poverty. Next, please. So all of this kind of rests on our ability to actually collect time use data. And so we have a bit of a challenge here because traditional time use methods rely on time logs, and that's not really very well suited to subliterate populations. So we have an innovation, a technological innovation. We're using two wearable devices, so a watch, picture down here at the right, and a voice recorder here at the left, to capture spoken activity logs and to replace traditional time logs, or I should say spoken activity clips. So the idea is that the watch with an alarm system prompts folks to make audio recordings at set periods during the day. Next, please. So currently what we're doing in Santa Barbara is testing this tech in what we call the WHAM pilot study. So WHAM stands for Wrist, Worn, Heart, and Activity Monitoring Pilot. And we're currently enrolling graduate students and undergraduate students living with other students in households of 3 or more, and we can send 3 or more people into this 2-week study. And you don't need to read this sort of study flow here on the right, but I think it's a nice thing to reference. The overall idea of the study is that we consent folks for about 2 weeks. They wear both the watch and the recorder for that 2-week period. They make 3 audio clips a day, and they also keep time logs. So and I should have mentioned too that the watches, those blue watches on the right from the last slide, are heart rate monitoring watches. So they also help us collect kind of indicators of daily effort. So at any rate, in this study, they're consented for about 2 weeks. They wear these watches all together, complete the time logs, and then we ask them different sort of survey questions at each point. So there's three points where we ask them about their stress, about their household demographics, and currently actually about COVID. Next, please. So let's look at some sort of preliminary results. So to date, we've actually consented about 15 people, which is about 5 households. This is the results, or I guess a selection of results from one participant here. So her first alarm was at 9 o'clock. So on the left here is the audio clip, and on the right here is her corresponding time log. So she says, so my Monday morning recording. Since my last recording, I talked to my roommate for a while, then I ate dinner, maybe ate dinner before, I can't remember now, then went and got in bed, then watched Netflix for a bit, watching Next in Fashion, woke up a little later this morning than I had anticipated, still haven't quite recovered from daylight savings. I had a dream about going to the aquarium, so that was exciting. I've laid in bed for a while, now I'm going to get up and get ready for the day. And I should say too that these recordings aren't blind, so they're prompted by the watch, but we also prime our participants by saying we want to know sort of WWCA. So what have you been up to since your last recording? Where have you been since your last recording? What's your current context? And what's your current activity? So we can see that her audio clip here on the left corresponds pretty nicely to what she recorded on the right. We get a little bit more detail about the night before. And I would point out too that we get a little bit of planning. So that last sentence, I've laid in bed for a while, now I'm going to get up and get ready for the day, seems to correspond to what she's written for hour 10. We also do get some extraneous information like dreaming about an aquarium. So that's kind of exciting as well. Next, please. All right, so this is her second alarm at 3:30 in the afternoon. And she says, this is my afternoon recording. Since my last recording, I slept a little bit because I was still adjusting from the time change for daylight savings. Then around 10, I got up and showered and got ready for the day. Didn't make it to my first class, but that's okay. Then I walked over to South Hall. The potential graduate students for our department are visiting. So I went with them to give a tour around campus. So we just walked around different buildings on campus, then made it back to South Hall around 12, and then ate lunch in my office. Then I walked to North Hall where I had class for an hour. Then I walked to South Hall where I worked on homework for an hour. Then I had office hours for an hour. Then I met with a directed reading program student for an hour, and then I walked home. Now debate whether I want to eat dinner or not. So clearly there's a lot of information here on the left, but let's see how well it corresponds on the right. So we see the sort of shower, get ready for the day. We see the give campus tour to potential students. We eat lunch, walk to class, walk to South Hall, study geometry, office hours, the ERP meeting, walk home, and we get the locations of those. One thing that I would say too is we see some nice parity between both the sort of audio clip and the written clip, which is exactly what we're going for. So we're very pleased about that. And I would say too that we actually get a little bit more detail out of the audio clip in the sense that we see that she didn't make it to her first class, and we would not have known that from her time log. So if that missed activities would be of an interest to, the researcher, the audio clips might give more insight than just written logs. Next, please. All right, so this is her last recording at 9 p.m. And she says, this is my nighttime recording. Since this afternoon, I was at home, I ate dinner and talked to my roommates. Then I wanted bagels for breakfast tomorrow, but I didn't have any, so I went to the grocery store to buy some. First went to Smart & Final, but they didn't have what I was looking for, so I went to Albertsons and bought what I needed. Then I drove home, carried things I bought up the stairs and put all my groceries away, yawn. then talked to my roommates for a little bit, then was just on social media for a while. Now I'm in bed, we'll probably watch some Netflix for a little bit and go to sleep. So we see, again, a nice kind of parody with what is presented in her audio clip on the left with what she writes in her clip on the right. I would say too that once again, we get a little bit more detail. We get some of the reasoning, right? So looking at just her time logs, we see that she went to 2 different grocery stores, Smart & Final and Albertsons, but we don't have a sense of why. And we do get that in the audio clip, right? They didn't have bagels and she wanted bagels. Next slide, please. So this is all well and good when you have one or a few recipients that or participants, excuse me, that are verbose, let's say. What happens when we have folks who are maybe less verbose? So this is from a different participant on one of his days. And we can see that we just don't really get a lot of information. What we do have is some parity, right? So we went to the gym, came back, made lunch, and that was it. And so that is sort of echoed in that time log on the right there. But this, yeah, I spent most of the day here, including cleaning my room, taking a nap, cooking, doing my homework, grad student life is a blast, seems to be sort of missing from the time log on the right. Similarly, study, procrastinate is sort of missing from the audio clips on the left. However, I would say that they are both missing, right? So they're both kind of lacking in detail and lacking in a total day kind of attribution of activities. Next, please. So where does this leave us? Well, I would say that kind of from this brief kind of preliminary data results, our technological innovation has promise as an alternative method to traditional methods. However, it's still limited by some of the constraints of these traditional methods, so namely kind of willing participation. So if folks aren't willing to participate in one, then they are going to provide less detailed data, but it seems to be, that part seems to be consistent both across the sort of new technology as well as the sort of written time logs. So for our next steps, we are hoping to formalize comparisons between the time logs and the audio clips. We will incorporate the survey data and interviews and identify needed supplemental information for the audio clips. So this is really important for the survey development for the Senegalese households, because obviously we're not going to have the time logs, so we need to make sure we ask the supplemental information that we need in our surveys. We need to incorporate measurements of effort from the watches, which we've sort of already started doing, but I'm not presenting on today. And then finally, we need to prepare trainings for deployment in Senegal. So a lot of this rests on appropriate use of the technology and appropriate training. So we need to be able to prompt people to capture the kind of information that we are looking for in the audio clips. So I would be remiss not to thank USAID as well as UCSB for sponsoring me on this project, and my sort of core team here. So Sari Blakely, our postdoc, and then our 2 volunteer research assistants, Theo Lee on the bottom and Sarah Schlund. And I think that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Sophia, and apologies to everyone for, and mostly Kaitlin, for dropping off precipitously earlier, but I'm back. I had a user-generated equipment malfunction, meaning that my laptop ran out of batteries. Helga had a question for you, Sophia, that Jackie, who's another postdoc on the project, has given an answer to, but you might also want to respond. Helga's question is about effectively like, will participation in this project and women and the other household members that are participating, do you imagine that their understanding now about their time use and differences in efforts and activity will actually result in differences in negotiation between household members?
I think that that's a great question. And I would say that it's a little bit different than what we're seeing in our undergraduate and graduate population here at UCSB. We're actually seeing a lot of just like folks are wearing the watches and completing the time logs, and it doesn't seem like they're really changing their activity. However, we do ask them twice sort of about their technology use, so first for the first week and then after the second week as well, in a sort of burden of technology interview. We ask them, how has this impacted your life? And most of them say, oh, well, it's made me more aware of things, but I haven't actually changed my behavior. So I don't know if that's necessarily specific to our population, but I think you can be aware of something, but you may still not be able to actually change your behavior. So I guess my question is, or my answer would be not sure. So that, like, I'm not sure. But
I'm also curious about, compared to traditional methods, I'm curious what you think are some of the downsides of this time tracker methodology.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the folks that we have worked with so far tend to have a preference. So either they love the written time logs, or they find that much easier, or they really like the recordings. And the folks that like the recordings say that they have a better memory. They can, they capture what they're doing better. For the folks that like the time logs, it seems to be more, they seem to have more schedule in their kind of daily routine, which sort of makes sense, or at least that's the sense that they convey to us. I think some of the potential downsides here are technological too in nature. So a lot of the watches that are available that measure effort, which is something that we're really interested in that I didn't talk about today, are based on photoplasmathography, which is sort of a light that shines in on capillary, it measures kind of capillary blood volume, so it gets a measure of heart rate from there. And that can be limited by pigmentation. And so that is a real challenge once we start to incorporate effort. And I should say too that the effort piece is quite interesting because you can get things like sleep measurements, so you can actually extract out kind of sleeping hours and things. So you would think that would be pretty important in sort of fertility and understanding effects of fertility on time use. Right.
There's just, I think, 2 more questions over in the chat box, one from Dave and one from Paige that you might be able to answer.
Dave, great question. We're still actually reviewing the data. So this is we're ongoing enrolling. So we've had 15 people finish and we've got 6 people going right now. So I've looked at pieces of the data, but I haven't looked at everything yet. I would say it's a mix. And I'm very curious to see if it's gendered, right? So the question, I guess I should say, were most of the participants like the verbose example or the non-verbose? So I'm not quite sure. We're still reviewing. I would expect there's a mix, and I'm wondering if it's gendered. And then let's see, how will your training help overcome cultural barriers to using these devices? So we have actually sent some of the devices to Senegal already. As for the trainings, that is still very much a work in progress in terms of how we're going to best communicate the trainings and how we're going to get people to use the audio clips or make audio clips that are useful to us. But it appeared to be a relatively high acceptability for just wearing the heart rate watches at least. And oh yeah, Jackie answered that. Thanks, Jackie.
Great, thank you so much, Sophia.
Thank you.
Our next presenter is Anna Chandler, who is a colleague of Daisy Kemigisha's, who we heard from earlier. She's going to be also discussing their work in Photovoice on youth empowerment in Uganda. So thanks, Anna.
All right. Hi, everybody. I am Anna Chandler, and I am at the University of Tennessee. And I have been working under Dr. Carrie Stevens on the Photovoice for Youth Empowerment in Uganda research project, studying rural youth development in Uganda. So next, please. So our context for this project comes from a drift in African youth away from participation in the agricultural sector in general. And to work on this, we are going to be using a youth empowerment framework that describes 6 critical dimensions of youth empowerment as creating a welcoming and safe environment, 1, and 2, providing meaningful participation and engagement, 3, to create opportunities for equitable power sharing between youth and adults, 4, engaging youth in critical reflection on interpersonal and socio-political processes, 5, providing participation in socio-political processes to affect change. And 6, engaging youth in integrated individual and community level empowerment. So along with this, we will also be using Photovoice as our visual research methodology. So we will be using Photovoice because this is a methodology that empowers participants to identify, document, and reflect upon issues of a certain topic using photography and follow-up discussions. And additionally, there's a lot of evidence of Photovoice being used to stimulate change in women empowerment and human well-being and in health, but there's very limited evidence of application as a research methodology for youth empowerment and agricultural value chains. So we think that this could be a really interesting study. And so our hypothesis for this would be that using Photovoice as a novel methodology will result in improved youth empowerment in Ugandan peanut value chains. So our model for using Photovoice will be the Wang and Burris model for participant empowerment, which describes empowerment as increasing participants' access across 4 domains, which is knowledge, decisions, networks, and resources. So our objectives will be to 1, assess rural youth empowerment and peanut value chains, document and identify youth empowerment of the peanut value chain by utilizing participatory mapping and the Photovoice methodologies, and 3, disseminate findings of youth empowerment and peanut value chains. So our questions that we are going to try to be answering through all of these objectives are: how effective is utilizing Photovoice as a method to empower Ugandan youth in the peanut value chain process? And to what extent can Photovoice generate useful data and findings for empowering youth in an agricultural value chain? Next, please. So the Photovoice process goes as such. So it's a qualitative research project that gives communities the tool of photography that can help elicit responses about a certain topic or issues. So we are going to be traveling to our 2 areas, Noya and Tororo, and conducting Photovoice training. And then the smartphones will be distributed and the participants will take photos over the course of the next 2 peanut seasons. And then at the end of the 2 seasons, they will select their top 15 photos for reflection and to create a dialogue or narration along with it. And we will facilitate group discussions and then document those stories through community sharing festivals and displays, reports, presentations, and so on. Next, please. So the constructing the narrative that is going to come at the end of the 2 seasons when the participants will select their top 15 photos. So to construct the narrative, we will be asking them to ask themselves, just to help stimulate their thoughts and kind of what they learned and what's kind of going on in the photos. So they're going to look at a photo and ask themselves, what do you see here? What is really happening here? How does this relate to our lives? Why does this situation, concern, or strength exist? And what can we do about it? Next, please. Our participants that we will be working with are going to be the 2 districts of Noya and Tororo in Uganda. And so in objective 1, we will be recruiting these participants, 30 in Noya and 30 in Tororo. and they will be between the ages of 20 and 29. And all 30 of those youth will be trained in participatory mapping, which will be our control group methodology. And then only 15 of those 30 youth will be trained in Photovoice as well, and will carry out the Photovoice methodology for the next 2 years. The participatory mapping piece of it will just be done in 1 to 2 days, the same time that we will be there for the Photovoice training. Next, please. So as for our accomplishments to date, so we have the 3 graduate students, myself, and the ones at Makerere University, and Daisy that spoke earlier. The project has launched, and we have traveled to Makerere University to discuss and work on project overview and talk about Photovoice with the Makerere professors and graduate students. The youth have been recruited in Tororo and Noya. Sorry. And we have established a WhatsApp group with each district, and we have been communicating frequently, especially keeping each other up to date with what's going on, especially since everything's kind of been pushed back and moved around due to COVID. And as for Objective 2, documenting and identifying youth empowerment of the peanut value chains, we have secured the funds to purchase the smartphones, but the initial training of the Photovoice methods, participatory mapping, and beginning the photo collection with the first peanut season has yet to start. That was supposed to start in January or this past year, but due to COVID, we have not been able to travel. So, and then obviously Objective 3, we have yet to be able to start our work on Objective 3 yet with disseminating findings. So next, please. So our next steps, I'm sure as everyone is in the same boat, everything is kind of very up in the air. And this may be pretty optimistic, but our hopes would be pushing it back 1 year since it was supposed to start January 2020, potentially starting January 2021, with beginning with that initial Photovoice training and participatory mapping with those selected participants, and beginning the photo taking in February 2021. And then, so the regular check-ins with participants throughout 2021, that would mean after the photo taking begins monthly, the participants will be checking in on the WhatsApp group with us, and additionally choosing 1 to 2 photos every month that will then be put in to kind of a folder that they can choose from for their top 15 at the end of the entire 2 years. And so potentially February 2022, photo taking ends, post interviews, and that photo selection and photo collection, and those focus group discussions. Oh, sorry, next. And so timeline continued. Then if on this timeline that spring, summer 22 would be that Objective 3, potentially disseminating our findings through end of project workshops and festivals and photo displays, media outreach workshops. So yes, so we have been unable to move forward, unfortunately, due to COVID-19, and we have still yet to be able to start this project with the initial Photovoice training and photo collection. We have been able to travel there and meet the participants and kind of introduce the project and collect the funding for the smartphones, but unfortunately, moving forward, everything is still kind of up in the air. So I guess I'll answer some questions if it's time for that, Jessica.
Yes, thank you very much, Anna. I appreciate that. I think you speak for everyone that we wish that this was over. COVID-19 has certainly not made any of this work easier for us, but
sure.
I appreciate everyone's efforts. I have a couple of questions for you, and other people should feel free to chime in. I wondered if, you mentioned that, and I think Daisy did as well, that Photovoice hasn't been used much in the agricultural sector in Africa. And I wondered, we have very similar issues, I think, with youth participation in agriculture in the United States, with young people who are sort of reticent to join or find it difficult to come up with the capital or resources to engage in farming here. And I wondered if in any of your literature searches, if you've come across research done with Photovoice and youth in the United States or in other countries.
Yes, it's kind of globally that there's very little evidence shown on Photovoice in agriculture in general. There is a lot of work in the US and everywhere with Photovoice. Even it's kind of cool on Instagram to go look, even on social media, because that's where everybody is sharing their findings and their results, which is very cool. And I've gotten to connect with a lot of other projects there. But again, there is very little use of Photovoice in the agriculture sector at all, even.
Isaac has a question in the chat.
Yes. It is.
Right. So I think Isaac's suggesting that depending on the content of the photo, so if they do show something that seems to be negative or that's a barrier to their participation, then that question, what do we do about it, would be relevant, but maybe less so if they're showing something that maybe is improving their access to participation.
Sure. So Photovoice is a really cool methodology for the reason, at least I think, that it really has no language barriers. Photos don't, and that's pretty cool because it can reach everybody, especially change makers, and kind of help them understand the experience that marginalized or disadvantaged communities might be going through, and it kind of gives a voice to anybody. So when Photovoice is implemented in a community, these community members are able, it kind of gives them a platform to say, this is what's going on in our community, and it could reach people that probably would never see what's going on there. And you can kind of see from their perspective the conditions of the community through the lens of the photographer, and especially for individuals with limited power in a community, when they utilize Photovoice, the experience can really change perspectives and provide opportunities for these individuals to display their perception. And additionally to allowing these youth to participate in their own research and self-express their views. So it really does just empower them on their own, as well as giving them access to potentially making change in their communities.
Yeah, it would seem also that if you are able to identify certain elements or traits that would improve youth participation, then that would be something that perhaps policymakers or community members themselves would want to invest in.
Absolutely.
I just had one last question for you that was sort of related more to what Daisy had said. I think that you guys are going to be recording and transcribing the conversations that you have with the research participants. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I was just wondering who will be doing the translation. I imagine that because it's Photovoice, right? So the text or the language of the words that people are using really matter in this context. And so I wondered if you've investigated or thought about who will be doing the translations for you.
Yes, they're, I can't remember what they call them. I think even officers maybe in each district, or there's been kind of almost community leaders that have been kind of representing the youth groups on their own. And they're almost kind of like, not the mediators, but almost like a person that if there is that language barrier, then they can kind of help either translate. But the English we learned has been really strong everywhere. I think it was Noya that we struggled a little bit more, at least communicating more freely. But yes, we'll have translators who will be working with us. And I mean, I'm not sure logistically how that would work yet, if it would be someone translating just right there on the recording, or kind of what that would look like, or going back and translating it later. But yeah, there are people that live in the community that I believe Dr. Okello or Dr. Stevens have identified that we are actually communicating with in the WhatsApp groups that will be that person.
Good, thank you. And then just one more question for you, Anna, from Dave, noting that you're doing the participatory mapping early on in the project, and so you will have about a year to look at changes in study participant behavior with Photovoice. Do you think that you'll be able to see any effects given the delays of the project?
Does he mean the delay, or do you mean the delay between the initial training, once we have the training, and the end results, or just the delays because of COVID? Oh wait, sorry. I think you're muted.
Sorry.
Feel free to jump in, Dave. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just trying to, looking at the hypothesis of your proposal to basically see whether or not the Photovoice does have any potential to better understand or better empower youth. Clearly you have a baseline. The question is, will you be able to see whether or not that has an effect? And I guess I'm trying to get at, do you expect to see effects while you're using Photovoice, or do you have to use Photovoice and then come back and see if there was any changes?
I think both. I mean, kind of as I touched on earlier, with how Photovoice really does empower marginalized communities. Like, I think it does empower the youth during its use, because they really are participating in their own research, and while they're using it, it really does make them feel like they have a voice and kind of a purpose every day to go out and work towards something that we are doing together, and even gives them a community. But I think that continues on too, with kind of what I said, trying to reach those change makers and identifying potential issues within possibly even the peanut value chain. And then I really do think it's kind of twofold. So during Photovoice and continuing on after.
Great, thank you so much, Anna. I think just in the interest of time, we'll probably move on to our next presenter, who's Ella. But good luck, Anna, and of course, we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Things progress.